Have you ever felt the pain of being discarded by someone you helped build? It's like a part of you has been ripped away, without warning, without explanation. That's exactly how I felt when I read my own son's message. In a few cold words, he severed all ties, as if decades of dedication could be erased with a single swipe. For a moment, silence engulfed me. No family member rose to defend me. No look of compassion, only the cruel indifference of someone who had long ago planned to exclude me. But what Alexander didn't know was that behind the wounded woman was someone who had never forgotten who she truly was. That silent pain turned into something greater. While he celebrated my absence, I braced myself for a twist that would change everything. Yes, my son betrayed me, but he underestimated the strength of the one who taught him to take his first steps. And it was precisely this strength that he would see relentlessly. Are you ready to discover how the greatest humiliation of my life became the key to my most unexpected victory? Then stay with me, because what follows will show you that sometimes the best revenge isn't screaming. It's acting silently and letting success speak for you. There's no pain more silent than being ostracized by one's own family. When that message arrived saying it was time to cut ties, I felt as if years of motherhood had been wasted. The ungrateful son I'd raised with such affection had reduced me to a dead weight. No family member spoke up. It was at that moment that I realized the family's exclusion hadn't started there. It had been building slowly, with each cold look, each invitation that never arrived. Alexander not only erased me from Sunday dinners, but also from the memories we shared. I found myself facing a betrayal from the son I once swore to protect. The toxic family that had formed around him was led by a manipulative daughter-in-law who smiled as she pushed me out of the picture. It was like watching my own legacy being destroyed in slow motion. And the silence of others, oh, that hurt more than any harsh words. Reading that message made me revisit every little sign that I'd already been excluded. Trips without my name, celebrations planned in secret, graduations I only discovered through social media. It was as if Margaret Wilson, the woman who built it all, had never existed. This family rupture was the trigger for a pain I'd already been carrying, but had tried to ignore. And in that moment, I realized it wasn't just a breakup. It was a plan. And the cruelest part? Seeing the ironic emojis, the discreet laughter, the complicity of those who betrayed me in groups. Victoria, with her poisonous charm, acted as if it were all just a joke. No one raised their voice. No sympathetic glance. I was invisible. And invisibility is a kind of humiliation that corrodes from within, leaving scars no one sees. That message, however, wouldn't be the end. It was merely the trigger for something much bigger. For a brief moment, the pain nearly paralyzed me, but I soon realized it wasn't just an emotional attack. There was something deeper behind it. There was money. There were vested interests. There was a power play being played at my expense. It was a severing of ties that went beyond affection. It was a strategic move to erase my history and steal what I'd built. And when I understood this, something inside me shifted. Calculated coldness replaced tears. Because you see, when a mother is betrayed, she feels the impact in her heart. But when a woman who has fought for everything in life is betrayed, she also thinks with her head. That's when strategic justice began to germinate. I didn't scream, I didn't beg, I didn't ask for explanations. I just watched, like someone watching a traitor dig his own grave. And silently, I decided that this story would have an unexpected twist. So before they even knew it, I was already gathering strength. While they laughed at my pain, I kept secret evidence. While they thought they had excluded me forever, I plotted my response. And my response wouldn't be a simple outburst. It would be a public fall so relentless, it would become unforgettable. Because some ties, when severed, reveal the true fiber of who you are. And in that moment, I discovered I was stronger than ever. After the initial shock, I took a deep breath and stared into space with a calm only those who have endured many battles can experience. I knew despair would get me nowhere. Instead of reacting impulsively, I let calculated coldness take over. The silent pain transformed into clarity. I would not beg for affection from an ungrateful son, much less passively accept the destruction of my legacy. That message wasn't just a breakup, it was an attempt to erase me completely. And I wasn't about to let it happen. While he felt victorious, savoring the family erasure he'd orchestrated, I was remembering every document I'd been collecting for years. Secret evidence of corporate fraud, embezzlement, offshore funds, and embezzlement disguised as legitimate expenses. He thought he was fooling me, but I was already 3 steps ahead. It was then that I picked up the landline, the one many considered outdated, and dialed the number I'd kept saved for 3 years. On the other end, Eleanor Hartwell answered with the same firm voice as always. She was more than a strategic partner. She was an expert at exposing corruption with surgical precision. When I heard her knowing laugh, I knew the time to turn the tables had come. There would be no turning back. "It's time," I said, my voice calm, almost sweet, and she immediately understood the weight of those words. In a few sentences, we had agreed on the plan that would change everything. Eleanor would buy my shares, take over management, and, with a thorough financial audit, expose every fraud. It wasn't just quiet revenge, it was strategic justice. And I knew this would go beyond my personal pain. It would save the company and the people who still depended on it. In that moment, I stopped being just a betrayed mother and became a woman rebuilding her own destiny. While Alexander believed I was isolated and weakened, I was activating a network of allies he never imagined. I didn't need shouting or confrontation. I just needed facts and patience for the relentless turnaround to unfold in due time. The curious thing is that, as I was planning, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time: power. Not the kind of power that humiliates, but the power that comes from knowledge and truth. It was as if every humiliation I'd experienced was now an important piece on the board. He thought he was checkmating me, but little did he know I still held all the cards. And once they were played, there would be no escape. With the plan in place, I felt a strange serenity. There was no longer any anger, only determination. I knew this journey would require resilience, but I also knew that each step would be right. The woman they tried to erase was back, stronger, more strategic, and above all, ready to show that the best revenge is success. And this time, it wouldn't just be a moral victory. It would be the beginning of a rebuilding that would echo for generations. For 3 long years, while pretending to ignore the sidelong glances and the invitations that never arrived, I had been piecing together every detail of Alexander and Victoria's deceit. It was almost like piecing together a puzzle of betrayal, piece by piece. Emails, bank statements, fraudulent contracts. Nothing escaped my eyes. With each new discovery, the certainty grew. This wasn't just a toxic family, it was a scheme to destroy what I'd built. These secret tests revealed a trail of embezzlement so absurd it bordered on cynical. Offshore funds hiding millions, the charitable foundation used as a personal credit card, and even expenses on luxury handbags being explained as business investments. I watched it all silently, like someone waiting for the right moment to trigger a bomb that would change the course of history. It was a strategic, patient, and precise form of justice. With Eleanor by my side, the pieces began to move faster. She knew exactly how to turn each document into lethal ammunition against them. By buying my shares, she would gain full access to the family business and could begin a financial audit that would leave no stone unturned. The board, which had previously ignored my warnings, would be forced to face the truth. And this time, with no room for excuses. The feeling of having this plan in hand was simultaneously liberating and painful. Liberating because I finally had control over the narrative they'd tried to take from me. Painful because I never imagined I'd have to use these weapons against my own son. But when corrupt heirs choose greed, they ride toward their own downfall. I just needed to show the way, with irrefutable evidence. Meanwhile, Alexander continued playing the game of appearances, unaware of what was coming. He paraded with Victoria at parties, toasted with champagne at the foundation's expense, and believed his weakened mother would never react. It was almost ironic. Little did he know that every move, every post, and every improper expense was already recorded and organized for the big reveal. There was no escape. Luke, my grandson, also brought valuable information. He saw what others pretended not to. As a diligent student, he documented every outrageous expense his father made, unaware that he was contributing to his downfall. When he showed me the statements, I realized that even the most insignificant details reinforced the picture of crimes. It was as if fate were collaborating so that the truth would come to light, unquestionably. With everything in place, the plan took shape. Eleanor would take control, the audit would expose the scheme, and Alexander and Victoria would be publicly unmasked. It wouldn't just be a downfall, but a lesson, a demonstration that, no matter how hard they try to erase a story, the truth always finds a way to emerge. And in the end, they would understand that no one destroys a legacy without paying a price. As the plan began to move, I decided to adopt silence as my weapon. Alexander, noticing my lack of immediate reaction, panicked. The calls began arriving one after the other, at first subdued, then almost desperate. It was curious to see how the traitor who had dismissed me as dead weight now begged for an answer. Each ring of the phone was a reminder that silent revenge has a unique flavor. I watched the messages arrive, one after another, unfazed. "Mom, we need to talk. You can't be serious. Please answer." I didn't answer any of them. The desperation of a traitor is something that can't be explained, only observed. Suddenly, the one who had excluded me began to feel the weight of his own decision. And I knew that the more he persisted, the more satisfying the public downfall that would soon follow. It was at that moment that Luke revealed himself to be my greatest ally. He called me one night, his voice cracking, and said, "Grandma, I know they're lying about you." Then I realized there was still someone in the family with integrity. Luke not only believed me, but he brought information that confirmed every fraud. It was as if the new generation was choosing the truth, while the previous one was drowning in lies. With Luke's revelations, the puzzle was complete. He showed bank statements, photos of luxury trips paid for with embezzled money, and even conversations with Victoria admitting to fixing documents. It was living proof that corruption wasn't just speculation. My grandson, young and loyal, was willing to help me restore the legacy his father tried to destroy. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't alone in this fight. While Alexander bombarded me with calls, Eleanor moved forward with the audit. With each new document, the scale of the crimes became more evident. They thought they could erase the woman who built it all, but in reality, they were digging their own grave. The twist was underway, silent, precise, and inevitable. And the more they tried to control the narrative, the more they got tangled up. Victoria, always confident in her manipulation, began to show signs of panic. Social media posts became confusing. Stories were quickly deleted, comments contradictory. The house of cards was crumbling. Meanwhile, I simply watched, with the serenity of someone who knows that truth is a force no one can control forever. It was only a matter of time before the impact was felt. When I finally sent a single message to the family group, "Message received. Enjoy your last family dinner," chaos erupted. Alexander called 17 times in less than an hour. Victoria had an anxiety attack, and the group that had previously laughed at my exclusion was now plunged into fear. It was the first clear sign that the tables had turned, and this time they were no longer in control. The board meeting was the perfect stage for a public downfall Alexander never imagined he would face. He arrived confident, surrounded by allies who, deep down, were only there for convenience. But this time, the masks fell. Eleanor took command with a ruthless stance, displaying each piece of evidence as if laying final cards on the table. With each document revealed, his face drained of color, as if the blood were leaving his body. The atmosphere in the room was one of absolute tension. When Eleanor announced that from that date on, she would hold the majority of the family company's shares, Alexander tried to object, but there was no more room for argument. Robert and Janet, his former silent accomplices, had already sold their shares, sealing his fate. The look of shock and despair was the first visible crack in the corrupt heir's pride. Victoria, always so elegant and manipulative, now seemed a shadow of her former self. She clutched her designer handbag like a shield, but her eyes betrayed fear. When her personal purchases were shown as administrative expenses for the charitable foundation, a murmur of outrage filled the room. This wasn't just corporate fraud. It was an insult to those who trusted the company to do good. The previously passive board transformed. Harrison, one of the oldest members, raised his voice and asked, "In what universe is a $60,000 watch a necessary expense for a children's foundation?" The silence that followed was so heavy, the weight of shame was felt. Alexander tried to speak, but stammered. Victoria whimpered something inaudible. They were completely exposed. Then Eleanor delivered the final blow, the decision to remove Alexander from all positions, effective immediately. 2 security guards approached, ready to escort him out. Victoria was warned that she was banned from all company property until the criminal investigations were concluded. The couple who had thought themselves untouchable were now being treated like any common criminal. It was poetic justice happening before my eyes. I watched it all in silence, with an almost cold serenity. When Alexander looked at me, searching for some shred of compassion, I simply asked him calmly, "Remember what I taught you about consequences?" He lowered his head, unable to answer. In that moment, the arrogant son was no longer there. There was only a man broken by his own choices. Outside, the cameras were already waiting. The press, which had previously extolled Alexander and Victoria's success, now recorded every second of the humiliation. Photos and videos would show the world that behind the glitter of parties and travel lay a trail of corruption. The downfall wasn't just internal, it was public, irreversible, and exemplary. And finally, I felt my legacy was protected. The news spread like wildfire. Within hours, newspapers were splashing headlines about the audit that had uncovered a web of corporate fraud within the family business. What had once been seen as a successful empire was now exposed as a house of cards about to collapse. TV shows, business websites, and even universities commented on the case as an example of how greed can destroy everything. Suddenly, Alexander and Victoria became synonymous with shame. Employees who had previously feared losing their jobs began to feel a glimmer of hope. Many came to me personally, with tears in their eyes, to thank me for exposing the truth. They had endured unfair layoffs, benefit cuts, and empty promises while the couple lavished luxury. Knowing that everything would be reversed brought relief to those who had always worked with dignity. It was like giving back a voice to those who had been silenced. The story also attracted academic attention. Professors at major universities began using the case as a study in ethical governance. Articles and lectures appeared, showing how a company can be reborn after being purged of corrupt leaders. My decision to act silently, with evidence and strategy, became an example of strategic justice for other entrepreneurs. And suddenly, Margaret Wilson went from being the excluded mother to a role model. The story went viral on social media. Photos of Alexander being escorted out of the company circulated, accompanied by phrases like, "the fall of the spoiled heir." Victoria, who loved to flaunt her perfect life online, disappeared from social media. The public was divided between those expressing outrage and those celebrating the exemplary punishment. It was a spectacle of poetic justice watched by thousands. The most curious thing was seeing unexpected allies emerge. Former partners who had also been deceived offered support, while NGOs praised the recovery of embezzled funds. Even local politicians sent messages acknowledging the positive impact of the management change. This made it clear that, even amidst chaos, the truth always finds its supporters. It was more than a personal victory. It was a moral victory that benefited many. Meanwhile, Eleanor conducted press interviews, detailing the company's new plans to rebuild with ethical governance. Her every word demonstrated that it wasn't just about punishing the guilty, but about creating a more just and transparent environment. And behind the scenes, I watched it all with a serenity that only those who know they've done the right thing can feel. There was no longer any anger, just the certainty that the harm had been contained. This repercussion also brought an important reflection to society. How many stories like this go unnoticed because people are afraid to act? My example showed that it's possible to confront corruption without becoming hostage to pain. And so, my story stopped being just about a family destroyed by ambition. It became a living lesson that rebuilding is possible, even after the worst betrayals. With Alexander and Victoria out of the picture, the atmosphere at the company changed completely. It was as if a weight had been lifted from everyone's shoulders. Employees who had previously been downcast began to smile again. Rooms once filled with tension became environments of collaboration. The board of directors, now composed of ethical individuals, took on the mission of restoring dignity to the Wilson name, and little by little, trust grew again. The first step was to recover the embezzled funds. Every penny that had been used to fund indecent luxuries was tracked and returned to its proper place. The foundation's social programs, previously abandoned, gained new life. Children received support again, scholarships were created, and community projects emerged stronger. It was as if, from the ashes of betrayal, something even greater had sprung. Rehiring the unfairly dismissed employees was one of the most emotional moments. Many entered the room with tears in their eyes, surprised to be called back. I welcomed them personally, demonstrating that respect and appreciation for people would be the foundation of this new phase. For each story of pain I heard, I found the strength to continue rebuilding not only a company, but also the hope of many. The company's tarnished reputation began to shine again. Old clients returned, new partners approached it, and the press now spoke of Wilson Enterprises as an example of resilience. The company, once known for the controversies of its corrupt leaders, became a model of ethical governance. It was living proof that the truth can heal, even when it seems all is lost. And it didn't stop there. With part of the recovered money, we created a scholarship program for low-income youth. Luke, my loyal grandson, helped structure the project, bringing modern ideas and a forward-looking outlook. Seeing my legacy serve to transform lives filled my heart with peace. It was more than rebuilding what was destroyed. It was creating something new and even more meaningful. Eleanor remained by my side as a partner and friend. Together, we created policies that would ensure no fraud would ever again tarnish the company's history. We implemented frequent audits, independent boards, and transparent processes. It wasn't just a matter of rebuilding an empire, but of building a solid foundation that no one could shake again. In this process of rebuilding, I realized something profound. What was broken didn't have to go back to exactly the same. It could become better, more human, stronger, more just. And in that moment, I knew that my greatest victory wouldn't be simply unmasking Alexander and Victoria. It would be leaving a legacy that could no longer be corrupted. For Alexander, the world collapsed in a way he never imagined. Accustomed to being seen as the untouchable heir, he now faced headlines that branded his name as synonymous with corporate fraud. The investigation moved quickly, and every offshore account, every sham contract, every embezzlement from the charitable foundation was exposed. The ungrateful son who tried to erase me became a public figure of shame. And for the first time, he felt the weight of his own choices. Victoria's fate was no better. The woman who manipulated her family and helped orchestrate their exclusion now lived in the shadow of scandal. When accusations of embezzlement and misappropriation of donations for children with cancer surfaced, what little reputation she still had dissolved. Friends disappeared, social invitations vanished, and within weeks, she was just another name on the list of defendants. The luxury she once flaunted became a reminder of a false past. Their marriage couldn't withstand the pressure. Victoria abandoned Alexander as soon as she realized there was no escape from ruin. She moved to another state, trying to reinvent her image on social media under a false name, as if she could erase the past. Meanwhile, Alexander was mired in lawsuits, desperately trying to maintain some semblance of control, but everything was slipping through his fingers. Without resources, without allies, and without the protection of his family name, Alexander ended up accepting a mundane job at a second-rate consulting firm. The man who had paraded arrogance now walked with his head down, avoiding glances on the streets. He was almost unrecognizable. The heir who once sought to destroy my legacy had ended up destroying only his own life. This was true poetic justice. I had to do nothing but show the truth. And as if the social humiliation weren't enough, the legal consequences followed. Formal indictments were filed, and he was forced to give long and embarrassing statements. His remaining assets were confiscated to compensate the company and the affected employees. Every step he took was now monitored by law. There was no escape, neither with agreements nor empty speeches. But, curiously, what destroyed him most wasn't the courts, but the isolation. People he believed loyal disappeared. Former accomplices sold information to reduce their own sentences, and he discovered, too late, that greed doesn't create allies, only temporary accomplices. When the castle crumbled, he was left alone, and finally felt what it was like to be truly discarded. For me, there was no pleasure in seeing him like this, only a kind of silent peace. I didn't need to lift a finger to punish him beyond what had already been done. Alexander reaped exactly what he sowed. And deep down, this consequence was deeper than any planned revenge. He became irrelevant, and that for someone driven by ego was the worst possible sentence. In the end, I realized my greatest victory wasn't watching Alexander and Victoria fall. It was looking at everything that remained and understanding that I had managed to transform the pain into something greater. Wounded motherhood didn't define me, nor did the family exclusion I tried to ignore for years. What defined me was the choice not to become bitter, but rather resilient. The feminine power that many underestimated revealed itself in the most elegant way, rebuilding, not just retaliating. Over time, the traitors became mere shadows of the past. I no longer needed to think about them because they had lost any relevance to my story. While they dealt with the wreckage of their own choices, I focused on creating opportunities for others. That's how I found inner peace, not in punishment, but in renewed purpose. The best revenge is success, and it came silently, firmly, and irreversibly. A legacy that seemed destroyed took on new colors. The foundation grew, the company prospered under ethical governance, and my grandson Luke became an example of the future I always dreamed of. He inherited values, not empty ambitions. And seeing him by my side, I understood that, despite the losses, there was something no one could erase: the truth and character I had planted. Many people ask me if I've forgiven Alexander. The answer is more complex than a simple yes or no. I accepted who he revealed himself to be, and that set me free. I don't carry hatred, because hatred binds us to the past. I only carry the certainty that some reconciliations are impossible, and that's okay. Not every bond needs to be restored. Some need to be left behind. Society continued to look to my story as inspiration. Invitations to lectures, newspaper articles, documentaries. Suddenly, the woman they'd tried to silence became a voice for those suffering similar betrayals. My story stopped being just personal and began to serve as an example for others facing toxic families, corrupt companies, or threatened legacies. This was a moral victory I never imagined I'd achieve. In the silence of the night, I sometimes look back and see that message on my phone as a turning point. It hurt, but it also freed me. It freed me from the illusion that I needed acceptance to have value. It freed me to be who I truly am, without fear of displeasing others. And above all, it showed me that even in the worst of falls, there's always the chance to rise even stronger. Today, sitting on my terrace, overlooking the city that never sleeps, I feel only gratitude. Gratitude for having resisted, for having had the courage to act when all seemed lost, and for having proven to myself that true victory is not destroying those who hurt you, but becoming so great that they become irrelevant. That is the peace no one can take away. How many times have you felt diminished by someone who should have supported you? How many times have you swallowed the pain in silence, thinking you lacked the strength to fight back? This story shows that no matter how deep the betrayal, there is always a way to transform humiliation into power and pain into purpose. Perhaps you also carry invisible scars from a family breakdown, a betrayed friendship, or someone who tried to erase your worth. But remember, the best response is never immediate anger, but rather rebuilding. When you decide to rise up with dignity, life will show you who truly won. So think, who in your life have you allowed to define who you are? What toxic ties need to be cut so you can finally find peace? And most importantly, What can you start today to write a new story for yourself? If this reflection touched you in any way, don't let this message die here. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share this video with someone who needs to hear that there's still hope, even after the worst setbacks. Your voice matters. Your story matters.